Bruchim Habayim, welcome everyone. We are continuing on Halachot of Shabbat, Siman Mem-tet in Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, Seif Gimel and Daf Yud Dalet Amud Bet of the regular principle Mishna Berura. We're in the middle of discussion of what can you and what can't you eat on Friday. We mentioned that according to Halacha, a person should not be eating a lot on Friday because it is part of the takana, the enactment that Chazal made for a person to enter Shabbat when you are hungry, when you have appetite, to have Onek Shabbat, to have the Seudah of Shabbat, the Biur Halacha over here on Daf Yud Dalet Amud Bet, he brings that a person should not be eating at the Kiddush on Shabbat morning, mezonot, before you make Hamotzi, because that takes away the appetite from a person before he starts his actual Seudah, that he is fulfilling his obligation of Shabbat meal with, and therefore it's something to be mindful of. Now the Seif Gimel says Shulchan Aruch derech anshe maaseh leit'anot bechol erev Shabbat. The Hasidim, not the Hasidic movement, but people who were very careful in their pathways, the connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they would fast every erev Shabbat. I still remember back in Iran, on the Jewish calendar that you had from Chacham Kohen Tzedek, it would say on every erev Shabbat on Friday, it would say Hasidim v'anshe maaseh mit'anim. That was the minhag. That minhag is based on this Shulchan Aruch of Siman Mem-tet Seif Gimel fame. But now it's not so simple, because you'll see in just a moment that the minhag is not like that. Now the minhag is not like that. It is not advised necessarily to do that. Now, the reason that Hasidim used to do this is because Kedesh Yu Te'evim Le'chol Balayla, should have appetite to eat properly at night. Now, Maran Chida writes in Machzik Baracha in Sif Katan Bet that that's not the only reason. The reason also is because when you fast, you do tshuva, and that process of cleansing is necessary for acceptance of the extra part of the neshama yetera that the person accepts on Shabbat. That is enhanced by thoughts of tshuva and ta'anit that the person has on Friday. But you have also a counterpart to this, is the Kaf HaChaim, that brings in the name of Sha'ar HaKavanot in Daf Samech Amud Bet. Maran Ari HaKadosh writes that a person instead of fasting should be mechin to achalot to be able to accept the neshama yetera of Shabbat that comes on Friday, and that's the reason, says the Kaf HaChaim, says the Sha'ar HaKavanot, that Anshe Mishmar would not fast on Friday, because you're preparing yourself to accept neshama yetera. You don't want, so it's two opposites really. It would seem for sure a person that's not bothered at all with fasting. There's some people who are actually, they're very sensitive stomachs. If they eat a little bit, they can't eat with te'avon afterwards, and fasting doesn't bother them at all. So those people could fast or water fast. Many people do that on Fridays, and the Mishna Berura himself says this. The Chafetz Chaim writes, if a person is very sensitive, if you eat anything during Friday, then your Seudah Friday night is not going to be with appetite. So then fast. Then it's a good minhag to fast if it doesn't bother you and it doesn't damage you. You don't have ulcer, you don't have stomach problems. You could fast easily. So then fine. But nevertheless, the Kaf HaChaim does not suggest this minhag. Now, the Ben Ish Chai goes as far as saying, now we have the Sefer of Mekaf Se'el that was recently found in the Geniza in Baghdad, and they printed it. Over there, the Ben Ish Chai writes, if you have a minhag to fast on Fridays, you should do Hatarat Nedarim, and don't do it, because of this very concept. It says, you don't want to be me'uneh. But at the same time, as the Shulchan Aruch said before, you don't want to overeat either. You want to do minimum eating in order to enter Shabbat with a calm mind, but you have appetite in order to be able to eat Seudat Shabbat in a proper way. Now, says the Mishna Berura, the Haskamat Acharonim, the agreement of the majority of the recent poskim is that a person should not fast on Friday, on Erev Shabbat. Fine. That's again, we mentioned that the Kaf HaChaim agrees with that. The Ben Ish Chai even goes further. Chacham Ovadia writes that as well, unless, of course, is a ta'anit that you usually fast. For instance, if someone's parents' yortzeit falls on Friday and they fast every yortzeit of their parents, should fast on Friday, no problem. If there are many people who fast Erev Rosh Chodesh, every month Erev Rosh Chodesh. Erev Rosh Chodesh falls to be on Friday, fast, no problem. Those things are still fine. Or some people who fast Zayin Ba'adar, right? The Yortzeit of Moshe Rabbeinu, every year they fast in Zayin Ba'adar. Zayin Ba'adar falls to be on Friday, no problem. You could fast as well. But then you shouldn't finish it necessarily until Set HaKochavim. You should make a tenai when you accept the fast. And say, I am going to finish this when I daven Arvit of Shabbat, accept Shabbat. I'm done with my fast. So then you can daven early, and you don't have to wait until Set HaKochavim, and that would be fine. Now this becomes very important and really brings us to the next Seif in Shulchan Aruch, the last Seif of this Siman. Seif Dalet Maran writes, in Kibel alav litanot be'erev Shabbat, if you accepted to fast on Erev Shabbat, then you have to fast until Set HaKochavim. That means, depending on how you measure it, at least 20 to 27 minutes after Shkia, according to, Rabbeinu Tam will be 72 minutes Zmaniot, or not Zmaniot, 42 minutes, 70 minutes, 90 minutes. It will be very late. Unless, says the Shulchan Aruch, Im lo sheperash b'shah shekibel ta'anit, ad sheyishma hatzibur tefilatan. Unless you explicitly mentioned a Tanai, when you accept the Ta'anit, that I am doing this until I accept Shabbat. Accept Shabbat, Ta'anit is done. And then you're good to go. You could make such a Tanai on a Ta'anit that you have on Erev Shabbat. Unless the Shulchan Aruch ends, I'm skipping the Ramah now just for this purpose, unless it's Ta'anit Chalom. If a person has Ta'anit Chalom, that means he dreams about a very bad dream. Now, we don't know nowadays what's a good dream, what's a bad dream. Actually, in the 9th parak of Masechet Brachot, there are many things that sound pretty horrible, and the Gemara says these are amazingly good dreams. So we don't really know. Shulchan Aruch ends up saying a person does not fast Ta'anit Chalom unless it's one of the 3 known negative dreams. If you have one of those 3 dreams, then you fast. Now, the way you fast is not that you wake up in the morning and say, okay, today I have a lot of meetings, I'm going to fast tomorrow. It doesn't work like that. Ta'anit Chalom only works on that day. You wake up in the morning, you're fasting. You don't eat, you don't drink until a full day, which would be Set HaKochavim. So if you're doing Ta'anit Chalom, says Shulchan Aruch, that's not Tenai, Shemenai, it doesn't work. You have to fast all the way until Set HaKochavim, even though that you go into Shabbat. Why? Because even on Shabbat itself, you would fast Ta'anit Chalom. If you have one of those 3 dreams and you wake up on Shabbat morning and you're disturbed, you're fasting on Shabbat. The Rashba writes that fasting on Shabbat is a Isur D'oraita. Yeah, you fast Sunday also to make up for the fact that you fasted on Shabbat. You have to fast one day because you fasted on Shabbat, but you still fast on Shabbat because the only thing that could knock out the negativity of what would supposed to be happening, a negative thing that you dreamt about, and it's a sign of negativity coming, Chas v'shalom, would be Ta'anit Chalom. Gemara says Ta'anit Chalom is good for the bad decree, like water is on fire. It completely extinguishes the bad decree that tears it apart. So therefore, you could only do it that day. The Gemara says. Even as on Shabbat, you fast on Shabbat, and then you fast another day for having disgraced Shabbat. Now, that being said, the Ramah disagrees. The Ramah says there are those who say, even if you didn't make a Tanai, you still only fast until Sibur accepts Shabbat, and Yalla, you're good to go. Now, like Kaf HaChaim writes, our minhag is, of course, like Maran. So if you accepted Ta'anit upon yourself, and you didn't say that you are opening the Ta'anit by the moment that Sibur accepts Shabbat, then you have to actually fast until the end of the day, which is Set HaKochavim. The end of halachically, the end of the day is Set HaKochavim. Therefore, you would be bound to fast until Set HaKochavim, right? So that's that. Now, by the way, the Birkei Yosef Maran Chida writes They don't have to verbalize saying it. Even if you thought, you said, I am fasting until Sibur accepts Shabbat, that's sufficient. But it has to be a clear thought that passed through your mind. That's the decision that you had, and that's good to go. Now, even according to Maran, that you didn't make a Tanai, you fast until Sedat Kochavim, which means you're an hour into Shabbat and you're fasting. That's not considered a disgrace for Shabbat. You don't have to fast another day. This whole thing is only when you fast the whole Shabbat. But this, going into Shabbat, is not necessarily a recommended thing that you enter Shabbat and you feel like horrible. But if you have to do it, you have to do it. You don't have to fast necessarily another time. Now, that basically is what we have to cover on this topic. There is one more Mishna Berura that we have not done yet. So it says the Mishna Berura, if you do it until Sedat Kochavim, that you know at Sedat Kochavim, regular Tuesday, if you accept to fast, the fast goes until Sedat Kochavim, because halachically speaking, what's the end of the day? End of the day is not Shkia. End of the day is not when you accept Shabbat. End of the day is when you have Sedat Kochavim, when you have 3 mid-size stars visible to naked eye. That is the nightfall, and that is halachically considered the end of the day. Not the brightest stars, but mid-size stars. There's big stars, there's mid-size, and then there's small stars, right? When a naked eye of a regular person, without like a 2015 type of vision, but so a regular person could see 3 of the mid-sized stars. That's nightfall, and therefore in a regular weekday, if you accepted to fast, that's the time that you would have to go until. But this is something that discussed in Halachot of Tanit later on, in the beginning of Siman Tav Kuf Samech Bet. Same would be over here. It's not asur to enter Shabbat with Tanit if you accepted to fast. That's fine, as we mentioned. Even though that on Shabbat itself, we already mentioned that's asur to fast. According to Rashba, you're dealing with a biblical prohibition. So therefore, that we don't do unless it's Tanit Chalom. But you could enter, nevertheless, the first hour of Shabbat with fasting, and that's fine. Unless you explained it explicitly, which in that case would be mutar. Okay. So it says let's just finish this siman over here. Now, says the Mishna Berura, I'm skipping 2 Mishna Beruras over here because we explained them outside. Mishna Berura writes in Ot Chaf Gimel, At Sedat Kochavim afilu hayesh omrim, hanal modu baze, שהרי אפילו בשבת עצמו יכול להתחילו לטענות תענית חלום. Right? Tanit Chalom, everyone agrees you could do on Shabbat. So therefore, even those who say that normally speaking, the Ramah, who brings the Yesh Omrim, that normally speaking we don't enter Shabbat fasting, but Tanit Chalom has no problem with that, because you could fast the entire day of Shabbat, Tanit Chalom. So no one is going to be bothered with that, fasting 1 hour into the beginning of Shabbat with Tanit Chalom. That would be completely fine, no problems whatsoever. Now, how about someone that has a lot of problems of fasting and completing it into the Shabbat? The Gav HaChaim says you can't rely on the Ramah. You would have to do Atarat Nedarim. It's not so pashut, because you have to ask a she'elah at the very least, because you're going against the minhag of the Sfaradim, and that's not something that you could just pick and choose. You have to ask a she'elat chacham in that scenario. Now we're starting the amazing siman of hachanat haseudot leShabbat, preparing for seudot of Shabbat, which is not just that you you bring some korban sabzi on Shabbat and you're good to go. The Sudot Shabbat have to be special. And therefore Chazal obligated us to prepare for them from before. This has an entire Siman dedicated to it in Shulchan Aruch, Siman Reshnun. Right? Siman Reshnun, the way you remember it is run. Right? You run, you have to run for Hachana for Shabbat, and that's exactly how it starts. Yashkim baboker, you wake up early in the morning, you run. B'yom shishi la'achin sorchei Shabbat, to go and prepare for sorchei Shabbat. You can't leave it for last minute. You gotta wake up early in the morning, right? Back in the day, that there was no fridges and no nothing. The shechita was on Friday. Everything was Friday, right? You had to go early in the morning. The bakery, you had to be 5 o'clock in the morning, standing in line for bakery, and then get your meat and get your vegetables. Everything had to be fresh. Nowadays, we're blessed to have the thing still at Kabbalah. Yom Shishi is the more mekudash. The Ben Ish Chai writes, the closer you are to Shabbat, the more holy it is. So therefore, the hachanot of Yom Shishi is more kabbalistically speaking more important than Thursday. But as we all know, and he agrees with it as well, if a person gets into shalom bayit problems and then the whole atmosphere of the house is tense, do it on Thursday. Nowadays, the Baruch Hashem, we have the fridge and we have everything in a systematic way. Do it a little earlier. Do it as early as you need to in order to enter Shabbat with peace of mind, with tranquility, with happiness, with some music. You want to accept Shabbat early and happy in that way. But that is partially the reason Chazal made this takana, that you got to get up early in the morning. Don't leave it for the last minute thinking that's going to happen, because who knows what could go wrong and you won't be able to have Shabbat properly. Even if you're a multi-millionaire, you have many servants working for you, it's not about getting the job done. It is about you getting the job done, participating in Kavod Shabbat, even though that you have Shamashim, you should do at least something. The Gemara goes through the trouble of mentioning story after story after story, all of the rich Amoraim and the high standing. There were many Amoraim who were multi-millionaires. They had Yerusha from their father, many of them were considered billionaires in our standards of life nowadays, and still they would leave all of their servants aside, and they would do even the dirty jobs of cleaning the fish or making the fire, which was a messy job, turning on a fire back in the day, with blowing out and smoke coming out. But they would do it themselves because they wanted to show that this is beloved to them. This is something that they want to do. Rav Chisda, who was the highest of the stance of Talmidei Chachamim in his time, he would cut the vegetables himself. Right, he would take the cutting board, sit there, put the apron on, and do the vegetables. The Rav Yosef, right, the Rashi Shivot, they would do the chopping of the woods. Right, that's not when the Jewish stories want to say like the lowest of the life thing, they say like the wood chopper, wood chopper. They would chop the wood. Rabbi Zera himself would do the fire, would turn the fire on. Rab Nachman, who was extremely powerful and rich, he married the daughter of the Rosh Galuta, and he was the Av Bedin, tremendous, right? He would sweep the floors and mop the floors and rearrange the furniture and set up the table, right? Yeah, a lot of avadim. They could have asked their servants to do it, but they would do it themselves. Who would take the weekday things off, who bring the Shabbat, schlepping everything back and forth. From them, every person should learn. You're not better than any of these people, right? We're not better than them. He says, it's beneath my dignity to do this. I have a servant for a reason. I work so hard and make one. Or let my wife do it. I do all the other things that my wife should. You just do it yourself, right? It's the kavod of Shabbat. It's your kavod to respect Shabbat, right? Just like it's your kavod to serve the king. This is how we serve the queen, serve the king. So, this is your true kavod and honor is when you honor Shabbat. The Ben Ish Chai writes that he himself in his house, he was in charge. He did something small. He prepared the candles for Shabbat for his wife. This way he had a Chelek also in the mitzvah of Hadakat Nerot. That's all he did. Every Shabbat, every Friday afternoon, he was the one preparing the candles. V'yesh la'ashchiz hasakin v'Shabbat. The Ramah throws this halacha in that you should sharpen your knives on Erev Shabbat, and that's part of Kavod Shabbat also. Imagine you have this steak, especially if you want to have it rare, medium, or rare, and you're trying to cut it on Friday night and it's not cutting. Ruins the whole Shalom Bayit, right? You want to have like sharp, nice knives. Part of the Shalom Bayit. There are Kabbalistic things for this as well, which we're not going to enter right now. But nevertheless, that is what Shulchan Aruch says. And the Seif Bet, he writes, Yarbe bebasar v'yayin umigdanot kefi yecholto. You should have meat and wine and geschmack things, migdanot, pleasureful items, delicacies. And delicacies is based on a person as well. Or what you enjoy to have on Shabbat, that's all part of Kavod Shabbat as well. Again, this is you have perot on Shabbat. Kabbalistically speaking, the Kaf HaChaim says because Knesset Israel has been exemplified with temarim, right? It says komatech damtar tamar rimonim. It says kepelach harimon rakatech egozim, right? The nuts and so on, because it says El Ginat Egoziarati. So Ben Ish Chai says that, and Kaf HaChaim rather says that a person should do that. Even tapuchim, tapuach b'atzayar, apples, fruits are part of Kavod Shabbat as well. Again, seasonal fruits and regular ones are all good to add Kavod Shabbat as well. Now. Few small honorable mentions here in this halakha. That the Shulchan Aruch says you should wake up early in the morning. Now, if you are, this is so important. The Shulchan Aruch in Choshen Mishpat, in the halachot of damages, right, says that if a person was running on Erev Shabbat, right, for Sorchei Shabbat, and he ended up damaging something. This is in Siman Shin Ayin Chet, in the beginning, in Shulchan Aruch Choshen Mishpat, that if he got damaged, is chayav to pay because he's running in a Shut HaRabim, and that's not something that he's allowed to do, but that's only in weekdays. The Shulchan Aruch says if you're running on Erev Shabbat, Ben Hashmashot, right before Shabbat, you're running to make Shabbat, then it's Patur Min Shalem, because that is a time that everyone is running. Everyone is trying to get to do things for Shabbat, and that's one of the differences. It's showing the normalcy of the rush of Erev Shabbat. And that also tells you that you have to be smart. You don't want to get into that situation in which right before Shabbat you're running around like a chicken without a head. You want to plan yourself ahead of the time to enter Shabbat properly, calmly, and with simcha. Now, we're out of time because there's still some important nuggets that Be'ez Hashem will cover in the next shiur, and hopefully we'll catch up to our pace in the days to come. Chazak u'beruch.